Okay, I want you to imagine an invisible enemy. It moves silently, it strikes the most vulnerable, and it honestly has the potential to absolutely devastate $1 billion agricultural empire before we even have the tools ready to fight back. This isn't the plot of some crazy sci-fi thriller. This is a very real, very terrifying biological threat that has literally just arrived on our doorstep.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a high-stakes, fast-moving logistical battle against a devastating pest known as the New World screwworm. We're going to break down exactly what this threat is, why it puts the nation's entire food supply at risk, and the incredible, almost unimaginable race against the clock that is currently underway to stop it in its tracks.
Section 1. The flesh-eating threat and a second confirmed case. So the breaking news that kicked this impending crisis into high gear comes directly from Texas Parks and Wildlife. They've officially identified the New World screwworm. Now, this is a flesh-eating parasite that operates in a uniquely gruesome way. Basically, adult flies target the open wounds of warm-blooded animals, laying hundreds of eggs at a time. And when those eggs hatch, the larvae literally feed on living tissue. They burrow deeper, causing immense suffering or even death. Right now, the #1 concern is the grave danger this relentless biology poses to the state's massive cattle populations. And here's why the alarm bells are ringing so loudly right now. Look, this isn't some isolated incident from months ago. A second confirmed case has already been found in a calf in Symbolic County, and this happened in the exact same week as the first case. You know, when you're dealing with a parasite whose life cycle allows it to multiply exponentially in just a matter of days, having back-to-back confirmations in a single week, that completely shatters any hope of slow containment. It signals a fast-moving outbreak that requires immediate, decisive action before the whole thing spirals out of control. Section 2. A $7 billion stake. The nation's cattle leader. Look at that number, $7 billion. Just let that massive figure sink in for a second. That staggering amount represents the total value of the cattle industry in the state of Texas. But it's not just some corporate figure. That $7 billion is made up of thousands of family-owned ranches, massive meat export operations, and really the lifeblood of countless local rural economies. If a flesh-eating parasite runs rampant through these herds, destroying livestock generation by generation, the financial devastation at the ground level would be absolute. It would be catastrophic. But the threat actually goes far beyond state borders. Texas ranks as the undisputed #1 in the country for cattle. So an outbreak here doesn't just threaten the Texas economy, it genuinely jeopardizes the entire nation's agricultural supply chain. When the #1 producer of beef takes a hit like this, the economic ripples are profound. We're talking about potentially massive price hikes and supply shortages felt in grocery stores, butcher shops, and dining room tables from coast to coast. Section 3. The sterile fly solution, a biological countermeasure. So how do you even fight a massive biological threat like this? Well, with a pretty fascinating biological countermeasure. We deploy sterilized flies as our best and frankly our only weapon. It's actually a brilliant 3-step process. First, millions of lab-raised sterilized flies are released into the wild right over the affected area. Second, these sterile flies mate with the wild population, but because they're sterile, no offspring are produced, which systematically disrupts the parasite's entire reproductive cycle. And third, this sudden population crash effectively stops the spread of the worm right in its tracks. You're basically fighting nature with nature. But there is a massive catch. Section 4. A critical supply shortage. By the numbers. And this brings us to the ticking clock of our story, and honestly, a terrifying logistical hurdle. Historically, during previous major outbreaks, the United States needed 500 million sterile flies every single week to effectively blanket the zone and handle the problem. But our current production? It's sitting at a mere 100 million flies weekly. Even when a planned new facility gets fully up and running, it's only projected to produce 300 million per week. So right now, facing a highly active threat, we are vastly under-equipped to deploy the only biological solution that actually works. To fix this drastic shortage, the federal government scheduled a brand new sterile fly facility down in South Texas. But the target date for completion? November 2027. That is years away. When you have a rapidly spreading flesh-eating parasite that multiplies in a matter of days, waiting until late 2027 leaves a highly dangerous multi-year gap in our agricultural defenses. It is basically a mathematical impossibility to fight a fast-breeding biological threat with a facility that won't even open for 3 more years.
Section 5. The race to build and a state of emergency.
With billions of dollars on the line, that 2027 timeline simply isn't going to work. The state's urgent response is driven by a stark reality, which was summarized perfectly by Texas Governor Greg Abbott. He said, "We cannot make it to a second summer." See, if this pest survives the winter, a process known as overwintering, and is allowed to multiply completely unchecked when that brutal Texas heat returns, the population explosion will be exponential. The damage to the herds would be irreversible. Waiting until 2027 is definitively off the table. Because of this incredibly tight window, the governor signed an emergency declaration to forcefully speed up the response. This unlocks some incredibly powerful administrative tools, making any and all state resources available immediately without the usual red tape. Most importantly, to address that looming 2027 deadline, it mandates an extreme 24/7 construction schedule on the new sterile fly facility. They're throwing literally every single piece of heavy machinery, funding, and manpower they have at this site, completely upending normal infrastructure rules. This creates a massive timeline clash. On one side, you have the original federal schedule projecting completion in November of 2027. On the other side, you've got the Texas push, driven by this emergency declaration demanding completion by May of next year. They're basically attempting to shave 2.5 years off a major infrastructure project through sheer will and round-the-clock labor. It is an administrative pivot of monumental proportions, moving a multi-year deadline all the way up to a matter of months. Which really leaves us with the ultimate question. Will 24/7 construction actually be enough to save a $7 billion industry before the next summer? It is a true race against nature, a real test of pure logistical endurance, and the stakes quite literally impact the entire country's food supply. They have the plan, they have the biological solution, but now it all comes down to beating the clock. Thanks for watching this explainer, and definitely keep your eyes on how this dramatic race unfolds.